always remembered the excitement of putting down a beautiful plate, and especially when you were serving every customer virtually walked in the door or touching every table that was seated in the restaurant that lunch or dinner. Was when you saw the face on people before the meal and after the meal. It's that self-satisfaction, and you never lose that.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. It's been a period of change, of trauma, of letting go, of taking risks, of heading down new paths and finding a better world. The restaurant industry has been forced into adaptation, evolution, and change like no other time in history. Some have gone in directions they had never conceived, or taken opportunities they never thought would present themselves. Amongst the madness, there have been some amazing stories of change and success too. Rob Rubis is the owner of Manta restaurant, Molo Bar, and Fisherman's Wharf Seafood. Rob, how you going?
Well, I can only say stress would be an understatement in these times, but I'm sure there's plenty of people experiencing that at the moment.
Not that long ago, a year and a half ago, around when the pandemic started, you ventured sort of away from restaurants a little bit and into a fisherman's co-op. Was that something you had planned, or is it did that come out of these circumstances?
Oh, it was a combination. I think inevitably vertical integration was the goal, to find every restaurateur's dream, which they talk about paddock to plate. Well, this was trawler to plate on the day. And I think Manta is obviously a seafood restaurant, and that's what we sort of stand our golden star on. And it's the goal was to try and get a better product on the plate, as good as it gets. I don't think there's anywhere too many places in Australia where you'd be able to say that this came off the trawler this morning and it's basically on your plate in one form or other that night or even that lunch. And the goal was to just create that produce as good as I can get it.
There are many facets to running restaurants, and you've had many over your career. But how different is it working with a fisherman's co-op compared to restaurants?
Well, it's there's a lot of difference. A lot of things I've learned too. And God, I've been doing this for 39 years, and amongst 38 odd restaurants. But it's more the case that you've cut out a number of middlemen. B, you're dealing directly with the trawler owner, and also the co-op. They simply facilitate a storage facility and take a small percentage where the trawlers come into. But it's at the back door of the business, so you're really dealing right with straight off the water. They'll actually phone you as they're coming in from on an overnight run. They'll give you a call an hour or two before they dock, so you'll know exactly what they've got. And that's just a godsend.
How different has that changed the offering of Manta and the sort of seafood that you can put on the menu?
I think, Anthony, the main thing is I don't think anyone in Sydney is really doing it or if they are, it couldn't be much fresher. But it's created something that I think even a lot of our customers have certainly noticed in the last 18 months. They've just said, "Gosh, it's literally a case of as fresh as you can get it, literally, unless you caught it yourself." And I think that's what we've tried to achieve. Yeah, and that's a big thing, and it's being noticed. You can really pick it up through the customers and so forth. That's what we're doing. I mean, it's the problem you've got is that trawlers can sometimes bring in different things. So consistency is always a little bit of a drama, and if the industry sort of thrives on consistency, but you may if therefore you may have a fish that could be up to 7 days, a large fish that could be up to 6-7 days old through a wholesaler. And they're trying to keep a consistent supply, and they'll maintain a backup. But this is a case of saying what you've got that morning is on your plate that lunch or dinner.
There's some amazing waters off the coast of New South Wales and fisheries there. Is there any sort of standout seafood of that region that you have access to?
Well, I think the main area of Port Stephens is its proximity to the continental shelf. We're the closest, and I think that's why you get that variety of fish from the longliners, which is everything from the big tunas, kingfish, mahi-mahi, those sorts of that style of fish, through to the more of the sort of the shallower water bottom fish like snapper, flathead, some mackerel, those sorts of things, and of course famous for their sand whiting up here, which is incredible. And that's sort of there. From there you get some other varieties, but they're your mainstay in this area. and naturally we've got some prawns and incredible lobsters. The Port Stephens lobsters are phenomenal, which we have a live tank here and a live tank in Manta. So they come straight off the trawler, straight to the tank.
You've had many amazing restaurants of influence over the years, but take us back to when you were young. What was food like growing up?
I was actually talking to one of my chefs about the other day because I did my apprenticeship long ago in the 70s, late 70s, and then went off and did, to keep my father happy, a law degree. And then then a mate of mine was opening a restaurant in Brisbane in 1983, and basically his new wife didn't want him to do it. Now I know why, because I did it, and it's a labour of love. But the industry in those days has changed since those days dramatically, and I think then it was a case of you did everything you could to make sure a meal was what it was, but the palate was different, particularly in Queensland, where it was all about the size of the meal rather than anything else. And I think I learned a lot of lessons by I drove down to Sydney after being open for about 7 months and bumped into or went and saw a number of quite prominent people, and one was Neil Perry when he was working at North Bondi. I think back in the early 80s, it would have been 83, and Mark Armstrong and a few other people down here that I went and saw, and basically they just said, keep it simple. That's when I started to change and look at how I actually can create something that's a little different rather than whether it be a piece of meat or a piece of fish, but just add something to it, whether it be a jus, whether it be the presentation of it, how you look at the plates and all those sorts of things. So it was a bit of an evolution process that started quite quickly, and I was pretty lucky then. Then we started to sort of pick up our act in terms of winning awards and things like that. And that first restaurant, I think I had 3 or 4 years of 3 chef's hats in a row of incredible sort of accolades, which was fantastic, and a very good team to work with it. But it was an incredibly steep, hard learning process, sort of time, and it really was all about just long hours and do whatever you can for the customer. That's ultimately what it boils down to.
Take us back to that time in Brisbane. What sort of food were you cooking, and how quickly did that change for you?
The food then we were probably doing a bit more along classical lines. I mean, whether a steak would have a reduction on it, with it a red wine reduction, a classic red wine reduction with maybe a duck stock or something thrown in, and a fish would have a cream sauce generally with it of some description with lemon and a fish stock. But you'd be spending a lot more time on making the stocks in those days. There was a bit more discipline, I think, in the way we did things. I think as time went on and obviously numbers grew in restaurants and so forth, there was a different philosophy of how you do things and how you create flavours and tastes. In those days, I think it was just 1 or 2 strong flavours on the dish, whereas now you could have a multiplicity of flavours, but ultimately about the produce. But I think then there was a bit more of a foundation, I suppose, for want of a better term. I mean, the basics never change, but I think it's how you apply the basics that change, and everyone now tries different things in so many different ways. Whereas in the old days, in the 80s and late 70s, it was more along the classical lines that you were taught or you read generally from a French cookbook.
What triggered your move to Sydney?
I think Sydney was the sort of hub of what you could do in restaurants and numbers. It was a numbers game always, and I think Sydney had incredible restaurants, had an opportunity to do things. I had a bit of work with Ridges Hotels, consultancy work, just prior to the Olympics, and the goal there was to sort of see what the Sydney market was like and what I could do with it, and we did. I got more involved on the catering side with Ridges. We built a catering arm to the company. And I helped do that, and then from there it sort of continued into an offer from a couple of gentlemen that owned a small boutique catering company called Truffle Group, and basically the story there goes. They asked me to help me write 3 tenders, and one was the Sydney Opera House, the catering for that. The other one was Fox Studios, and the other one was the Stock Exchange, and they said, "How much do you want to get paid?" And I said, "Tell you what, if we win all 3 tenders, I want a third of the company." And that's where it started. And we won all 3 tenders. And that's where it started. That's where the Sydney journey started in a more effectual way, a business way.
And take us back to that time. What was it like managing all of a sudden those 3 sites, all very different? What were the food offerings and experiences that you were delivering?
Oh, those were different days because it was predominantly about catering. We did have the company had a restaurant which the two gentlemen, Tom Rutherford and Chris James, put together called Liquidity, and was Elbay there, and that was just early days after the Olympics, and that was, I think, quite frantic times. The frantic times came when we won the Opera House and Fox Studios because they're big numbers, and we were three sort of lads that didn't have a lot of capital to do what we needed to do, but we certainly had a lot of enthusiasm, and the goal then was to just build it up as fast as we could and see what we could get out of it. But the offering then we sort of applied, and I think Tom was very instrumental in this, a restaurant style product to large numbers, and the three of us together sort of worked closely to try and make that happen, particularly in the Opera House when you're doing weddings of up to 1,000 people plus. And I think you've got to produce a product that people accepted was going to be of a restaurant quality product, and even in those large numbers. So that were the disciplines you had to employ particularly in those days when I think there weren't many boutique catering companies doing that sort of product for large numbers, and that's where we sort of kicked it off from.
1,000 guests is a lot of people to feed for an event. Do you have any stories or events or moments that really stand out you can tell us about?
Yeah, the first night in the Opera House, and actually we were all there, and we were cooking it wasn't quite 1,000 people, but it was a few hundred people, and we had the ovens in one of the wings, and of course that was against the rules. And if I remember rightly, one of the ovens caught fire in the Opera House. We didn't endear us very closely to the Opera House administration at the time, and because they were in shock, to be honest. But we were the attitude, just get the job done, and a few things happened along the way. But that was the very first function we did in the Opera House.
Wow,
it had drama written all over it, so that's how we kicked it off. Much to the dismay of the CEO of the Opera House and all their management team, and normal things.
You briefly mentioned Liquidity Restaurant, which was awarded a hat. Tell us about that establishment and how integral it is in what you did moving forward.
Oh, again, it was just a good team in there. Had a very good good kitchen team, and I think we worked very hard at a service standard. It was a unique restaurant in its presentation. I think it was a terrific spot, a little tucked away. In a sense, it's so close to the city, and it was so forgotten about. The cab driver didn't know where it was, but it had something unique about it. I think at the time we just produced a product that, luckily enough, we won a hat for, and it certainly had a few good years. And I think that whole super yacht area was forging ahead, so it was just good timing, and it was, I think, a lot of dedication to and back to my roots of a restaurant, and I enjoyed it very much. And that was in essence my first restaurant in Sydney.
You mentioned the importance of French technique early on in your career, but in Sydney you revived that French classic restaurant in Crow's Nest, La Grillade. How did that come about? We basically wanted to just keep building the company, and I think the goal there was we had a number of outlets, and La Grillade came up, and it was, again, the owner did a sort of a bit of a tender process, and we put our best foot forward, and I put a bit of a stories forward as to the background, and obviously wanted an operator that could survive in an area that probably wasn't known culinary for its how it does things. But La Grillade was an established good restaurant that we sort of basically applied what I believed was the right thing to do, and just keep it going in the way it was, and add to it just something, all the things we can do, and particularly in the produce side of things, and we kept it ticking away for quite a while. It was just I think the having number of outlets just got a little more difficult as you grow through that early. From a small business to a medium-sized business gets very hard, and you can lose your identity a little bit. So the goal was to keep La Grillade the way it was, and it was hard. It was always never an easy process because the small, intense restaurants require a lot of application. You mentioned about trying to hold on to identity there. There's a lot of operators that dream of multiple venues and a lot of them trying to do that. What sort of advice do you have for operators looking to expand and maintaining that identity?
Oh, I think the goal is you're only as good as the team around you. You need some seriously strong people who have a very good idea how to run multiple venues. I think that's really where it's all at. And also information feed. You really need to know what's happening in your venue every day. You really need to understand your staff incredibly well. You need to communicate with them. You need to sit and talk to them. You need to have a proper chain of management that everyone can assist each other with. And it's a hard, and particularly when you've got a high labour content operation, which restaurants are, and you have a multiple number of outlets, it can go wrong very quickly. And you really need that vertical communication, and you need information, and you need to keep your thumb on it constantly. It's a daily thing.
This episode is proudly supported by Montague, handpicked for you.
The things that we're really looking for in plums, first of all, they've got to be sweet. We're really looking for a full flavour explosion in our plums. Red flesh is critically important to us, higher in antioxidants, so all that good stuff. And then we're also looking at a slightly firmer texture. So there's almost a little crunch. You know, that's the real driver for us.
For more information, go to montague.com.au.
Sydney's Woolloomooloo Wharf is renowned as a destination with many great restaurants along it. What lured you to Manta and seafood restaurant?
Interestingly, it was the time we just extracted ourselves from a private equity structured deal, which included the Opera House and Centrepoint Tower and a number of, and the big catering company and so forth. We had a dream of building up this massive animal into a micro float and so forth. And obviously the GFC brought that to a halt. And we sort of pulled ourselves out of it, and the opportunity was, I thought, we'll go back to what we do best. And actually we had Nielsen Park, and I wanted to get something that sort of can go with that. And Manta came up for a purchase, and we battled with a few other people, and we looked at a few other sites. Actually looked at the old Hugo's Pizza site over in Manly too, on the Manly Wharf. But Manta was either one of those two would have been a term. You know, so Manta just happened to work at the right moment, right time. I think we were in the right place at the right moment compared to other people, because it was never advertised, never talked about. A few operators were looking at it, and I just swooped on it, and literally it occurred it was about a 1 or 2 day process.
Wow. What's so special about the Wharf and the restaurant?
I think the Wharf's unique, and after being, owning or being involved in almost 40 restaurants in my life, I think that is one of the best spots to own a restaurant in these days, and it's proven to be even more so under COVID. But there's a uniqueness about the Wharf, the view, the position on the harbour, the actual restaurants themselves, the outdoor eating. I suppose it's carried an eastern suburbs attitude toward it for a long time, but it really has something that's unique, and you're in a combination of terrific restaurants, being Otto and China Doll and Kingsley's and so forth. So you've got quality around you, and you've got a footprint that is spectacular. And I think position is one of the key elements of what you're doing there. And atmosphere is created simply by being where you are.
You briefly mentioned that it's not only like an amazing destination, but through COVID, it's proved even more so. What sort of impact has it had on the restaurant the last year and a half?
Oh, it's been a roller coaster, and we're back in the bottom end of the roller coaster now. But feeling my feet scraping on the bottom. But it went from basically famine, which was obviously the March, April, May months of last year, June, and then July, the world turned back again, the tap came back on, and people came out like they'd never been to a restaurant in their lives, and obviously they wanted to sit. They felt safer sitting outside, and 70% of the restaurant of the seating capacity is outside. So I think that was incredible from July through till 2 months ago. And then we went back down in the down part of the roller coaster. So.
What sort of impact has it had on you in the last year and a half?
It's stressful. Having been in this industry for almost 40 years, it's the biggest ups and downs I've ever experienced. Bar making that's out of your hands. If it's in your hands and you've made mistakes and the restaurant hasn't or has worked or whatever, it's up to you. But in this case, it's out of your hands, and it continues to be that way. And you're at the mercy of, be it a government body, be it someone else making a decision. It's not your decision. It's not what you do right or wrong. It's what someone else has done. And I know we're part of a journey all together in this, but in one way, certainly not financially, but in terms of medically we are. But it seems at this point in time in my business life, after all these years at my age, it seems there's a how can I put it? And I use the word we're in this journey together, but we're in it in the medical terms, but we're not in it financially, because it's just one of those things that the tourism industry, hospitality, gyms, hairdressers have been hit the hardest. Sadly, this time the government's not seeing that or understanding it as they did last year, and it's different. It's a very different environment at the moment, and I think it's a scary environment for the industry, because you've had to. And we did do the markets, we did do the deliveries, we did everything last year, but there was substance to do with government help to be able to get yourself back on your feet. As this year, you basically there's virtually nothing, and yet you're still in the hands of someone else.
You also have Molo Bar. What sort of impact has it had on that?
In the beginning again, and Ricardo Burnaby is the operator of it, and we're partners in it together, and he's a terrific, flamboyant character that runs that business and does it very well. After COVID last year, it was gangbusters, simply because it was an outdoor bar, it was done very well. It had phenomenal. It was terrific business, and it was a real adjunct to Manta, and the two of them worked very well together. It was just fantastic. And Rick did a fantastic job. We all worked well together, and it was good sailing, as they say. But naturally, like everything, you've got to keep at it. And I suppose this has again slowed us all down. And all we can hope for is when we get out of it, we'll have that rise again. And I think being an outside bar and having the atmosphere and the view it has and the offer it has, which is fabulous, and Rick does a terrific job. It's unique. It's very unique, given on the wharf and things like that.
What do you think is the way forward for the hospitality sector?
At this point in time, it's probably difficult to say, but it's still. I mean, it's one of the oldest industries. It's an industry that's been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It always will be. I think the way forward is simply the actual basis of it doesn't change. You work hard, you give a lot. You really have to look first at, do you enjoy, people have to enjoy what they do. And this is a very, very motivated industry where you need to enjoy what you do. To go forward in this industry now under these circumstances, it's very hard. You can't say one thing or the other. You just have to keep looking at, where can I evolve? How can I evolve? What can I do? It's hard for a 4 or 5-star restaurant to do takeaway and delivery, because it doesn't work that way. Fisherman's Wharf adds that side of it. We're starting to do takeaways and deliveries up here now, and that's the goal of what we need to do in that fresh seafood and that industry. But you have to keep thinking about what other things you can do to keep evolving. But ultimately, a restaurant is about what people like in a restaurant, and they're the things that time and mortal have never changed.
You've been involved in around 40 restaurants. Many of them have won accolades, but more recently you've got a fish and chipper. Can you tell us a bit about that?
No, it's just actually it's a bit of a learning curve after all this, but it's a fabulous way. It's a fabulous way to get a bit of vertical integration, because you basically, on one side of the business up here is all the full seafood retail with a big filleting room, and the fish comes in the back door gets all filleted and cut to pieces and so forth, and the nice centre cuts of the fish go out into the window, and the off cuts and the tail and the bits and all still the good bits, they'll go to the fish and chips. So you're basically utilising a lot more of what you're doing, and it's also turnover, and it's all the good things. It's everything you can do to make a business more efficient. And I think you learn a lot from this. Whereas when you've got you've got a restaurant like Manta or even the produce in Molo, and we're using parts of produce rather than all the produce. In this business, we can actually look at it and say, how can we get the most out of all of it? We can create everything from a beautiful centre cut piece of filleted fish that was caught that morning through to a lovely, battered and fried piece of fish that may be just off the tail or whatever, but it's still a beautiful piece of fish, maybe a different shape. Whereas in the restaurant, you'll have to have this perfect shape, and then you can use all the other bits in a beautiful seafood chowder. So you can just keep going and going and going with it, or a fish ball, or a fish cake, so that's where I've learned a lot up here. So, yeah.
How has owning Fisherman's Wharf changed your thinking about what you might do in the future?
A lot. Yes, it's a very good question. I think in this industry, it's a different way of running a business because I'm not dealing directly with the public as much. We certainly do the marketing and so forth, but here it's you almost take it as a McDonald's philosophy. Here you try and train your staff to be customer friendly, knowledgeable, and so forth. But nor is a customer coming in here expecting Manta, Molo style of service or produce. So in terms of the future, it's a nice way to use all the experience you have to create an environment where both the customer, it's a simple, very easy, but good, but pleasant process to come and buy a piece of fish or have some fish and chips, or for the staff to be able to know exactly what they're selling and doing at the same time without you necessarily having to talk to a soul in terms of their clients. And in actual fact, in these businesses, the staff can, once you get the efficiency levels right, you don't need to be here as much. You just need to make sure it all works.
After many decades of influence with many venues, what is it that you love about what you do?
Initially, it was just the contact with the people. You've got to love people in the restaurant business. In any retail business, you've got to love people. But I think the greatest thing I remember is actually always remembered the excitement of putting down a beautiful plate on beautiful, and especially when you're serving every customer virtually walked in the door or touching every table that was seated in the restaurant that lunch or dinner, was when you saw the face on people before the meal and after the meal. It's that self-satisfaction, and you never lose that. I think that's something that it's why I went into the industry, because I actually just enjoyed looking after people and seeing the enjoyment from people, and this work of art when you put it down on the plate, on the table, especially in the restaurants, and then you take it away and they say that was fabulous, and there's a self-propagating satisfaction that keeps you going, and that was probably that's why it started from walking out of a legal office and walking into opening a restaurant.
You mentioned the boom that happened in the period after that lockdown in March 2020 and to sort of more recently to this lockdown. How do you see beyond COVID? Do you think that the industry will experience quite a big boom? I don't believe it'll be like last year. It's different. This lockdown and this circumstance with the new strain and so forth, there's a lot more fear from what my experiencing talking to customers. There's a different attitude how they see things. I think, nor is there, the support is different financially, actually. And I think last year people went through a period where suddenly they're locked up, but they're not having to worry about their mortgage, not having to worry about, they were still getting paid quite well. They didn't have to worry about anything. And then they came out gangbusters with a dollar in their pocket. I think this time there's a lot more fear, both from the COVID itself and financially. You can just talking to people and getting that sense of what people are doing and how they're seeing it. They're seeing it very differently this time. And, it's a terrible thing. COVID is a horrible thing, and it's how we deal with it, and we have to deal with it. And I think this time it won't be it'll be solid because people will want to get out and do things, but I think it won't be this incredible. I've never seen anything like it in July, August last year. In winter, it was people just wanting to be out and spending. But it certainly won't. It won't. I don't believe it'll be like that this time. It'll be steady, and certainly people still want to go out. And I think we'll have to adapt to different environments. And I think
it'll be the same slow process in the beginning, and then I think it'll just be steady rather than this enormous sort of plateau lift that it was last year.
Having been involved with so many great restaurants, what do you think makes a great restaurant and memorable dining experience?
Oh, always saying a restaurant's a sum of 1,000 parts. The most important parts are the team, the people, all of us together that run the operation from the kitchen hand through to the front of house, through to the chefs, through to wherever. That is the core of what a great restaurant needs to be, and how that is held together is obviously through the management structure and how you all the way to the top, because it all happens. And I'm only as good as the next person, so that's the critical part of a great restaurant. From there, it's how each individual owner sees his restaurant, and normally it comes from a feeling of what he wants to sell and do, and how he wants the public to see it, and that comes from the passion. And ultimately, it's a passionate industry, and you've got to have the passion for it. It is the business, and you still have to treat it like a business, and so you combine the two. Hardest thing to do in the world, and if you've got good people around you, it becomes the easiest thing to do in the world.
Well, Rob, we've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear your story. Good luck with the Fisherman's Wharf, and obviously one of Australia's best seafood restaurants, Manta. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks very much. Terrific to talk to you. Thank you.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.